Hello and welcome to the fourth video in our series on fiscal policy. In this video, we're gonna discuss the role of taxes and how they affect the economy. So taxes are important because we think of them clearly as the other major fiscal tool next to government spending. And so the question here is gonna be, again, a positive question of whether the government can affect the economy by changing taxes. Now that's gonna depend on who's being taxed, but actually more importantly than that, how they are being taxed. And so we're going to be thinking of whether firms or consumers are paying the taxes and whether these taxes are transfers or if they are distortionary in any way. Now remember, if taxes are negative, we call them transfers. So that's kind of what I mean by them being transfers. Now taxes being distortionary means that the level of the tax is going to change the actions of people. And so that's going to be very important for us as we go through the discussion that we're going to have at the end of the video. So how do taxes affect the economy? Okay, the same as before, there are some direct effects. They affect aggregate demand for goods through consumption. That's going to depend on both present and future taxes. It's going to depend on whether consumers can borrow and save. But the important thing here is generally we want to understand what the effect of taxes is on aggregate demand through their effect on consumption. There are going to be also indirect effects. And this is again what I'm going to be talking about at the end of the video. Some taxes can distort the behavior of agents. So even if the total tax revenue does not change, changing taxes can change the way agents behave. I'm going to give you examples of these at the end. Now let's go back to the government budget. Here in the first line, we have the present value budget constraint. And in the second line, we're going to have what it implies for taxes. If there is no change in spending, then that means that the total change in the present value of taxes has to be zero. And that has an important interpretation for us because any tax cut today is a tax increase in the future. Or in the same way, any tax increase today should be met with a tax decrease in the future if government spending doesn't change. So that's going to be important because when we think about the consumer's budget, the lifetime wealth or the lifetime income of consumers is going to depend on the present value of taxes. But we just said that the present value of taxes does not change. And if the present value of taxes does not change, then there is no change in the lifetime budget of consumers. And hence, there is going to be no change in the actions of consumers. And so what we have here is basically in one slide, the concept of the Ricardian equivalence. The Ricardian equivalence saying that it doesn't matter when taxes are charged. Just the total amount of the present value of taxes is what matters. And so because of Ricardian equivalence holding in the model that we are treating, the model that we developed in the first module, the tax multiplier is zero. There is no effect on aggregate demand from changing the lump sum taxes paid by consumers. Again, because any change in taxes today has to be met with an equal change in the present value of future taxes, so that the total value of taxes is zero or changes by zero. And so because there is no change in the present value of taxes, there is also going to be no change in consumption. So here is where it really matters that we understand why this is the case. Notice taxes in this economy are lump sum. That means they do not distort any decisions of the agents. They do not show up in the first order conditions of the agents. Because they do not show up in the first order conditions, it only matters for the total wealth. So only the net value and not when taxes are being charged is going to matter. Consumers only care about lifetime resources. So if either taxes are in lump sum, they are distortionary, or consumers care about the resources they have today differently than they care about the resources they have tomorrow, this wouldn't hold. Now, this is important because I think it highlights one of the uses of economic models that is often overlooked in classes, and it is the use of models as foils. We oftentimes want to have a model that is obviously wrong, that has things that do not hold in reality, because it highlights, by contrast, what portions of reality are really important to understand the effects that we are after. So in this case, understanding why this effect is zero is not a way of convincing people that the Ricardian equivalence holds and that taxes have no effect on the economy. It's been more than proven that taxes do have an effect on the economy. But by having the model, we understand that if the world is as the model is saying, those taxes should have no effect. And so we can start thinking, well, in which way should I change my model? What are the aspects of reality that matter in order for this effect not to be zero? And that's what I want to discuss in this last slide of discussion of this section on taxes. Well, when does Ricardian equivalence fail? What are the things that our model as we have it, our very simple model, does not include? One thing is them being distortionary. And you can see for an example, the case of the first question in the first problem set. Labor income taxes can distort labor supply. And then the timing of taxes is going to matter because it's going to change relative prices. Changing the taxes today, say by decreasing taxes on labor today, even if taxes on labor in the future are going to go up, it's going to imply that the relative wage today, the effective wage after taxes, is going to be higher. And so there is going to be higher labor supply. And because labor supply is going to be higher, you can have an effect on aggregate output and aggregate consumption through cutting taxes that are distortionary. Another example is when consumers face financial constraints. Imagine that you have a consumer that has a borrowing constraint. So the consumer wants to borrow, but the consumer cannot. Then a tax cut is like a loan from the government that you pay tomorrow through higher taxes. The government is telling you, I'm going to make you pay less taxes today, so you're going to have some additional money lying around. If you weren't constrained, what you will do with that money is save it, because you know that tomorrow you're going to have to pay it in taxes. But if you're borrowing constrained, what you see is a loan. The government just decreased the amount of taxes you had to pay. You can spend those taxes knowing that tomorrow you're going to have to work harder to repay them. But there is an effect on consumption, which wouldn't be there if agents didn't face borrowing constraints. Turns out that a lot of the agents in the economy, especially the poorest agents, do have borrowing constraints they have to worry about. And so a decrease in taxes can increase spending for these people. Now, a final case that's probably a bit further away from the type of model we have is that taxes or transfers can reduce uncertainty. Now, in our model, there are no risks. Agents know exactly the value of all the variables and they know what's going to happen tomorrow. But real life is packed with risks, and an example is unemployment. So unemployment insurance is like a transfer, it's like a negative tax. Now, if there is unemployment insurance, then we know that agents, consumers, can search for better jobs. They can search for longer and have better matches, and these can stimulate the economy. And so we do see that during recessions, unemployment insurance, which is a type of tax, in this case a type of transfer, can be used to stimulate the economy. I want you to think of these because generally when we see the model in class, we just learn how to solve that model and we think, oh, okay, that's it. But the reason I often ask you about some deviation from the model in the problem set, it's because I want you to think of how we take the basic model where the basic answer is there is zero effect and make it into a model where we highlight something we're missing that's going to make that the effect is not zero, that taxes or government spending have a more complicated effect, and we're getting closer to models that better represent the economy we live in. And this understanding that the fact that a model it doesn't completely represent the economy is not a bad thing per se, because it's still highlighting what are the things that are missing that might be important for us to understand the effects we're after. All right. In the final video of the series, we're going to be going over a Keynesian model and thinking about the differences between the neoclassical model we've discussed so far and other forms of modeling the economy.